Okay, so as I said, I'm James. I'm hosting this session. Thank you all for joining. So let me just give some quick remarks about how this session is going to happen. So we have 4 panelists whom I will introduce shortly. And I will ask them a series of questions about their various transportation lifestyle choices. And that'll last about 20 minutes. And then after those 20 minutes, audience will have the opportunity to ask questions to the panelists. And I will prompt you when that time comes. And you can do that by raising your virtual hand, which you can do by clicking on the smiling face at the bottom of your window. So before we get to that, I'll ask the founder of our group, Charles, to give some contextual remarks about where this session came from.
Okay, thank you, James. My name is Charles Lin. I'm the lead and founder of Impact Net Zero, who is hosting this inaugural Net Zero Cafe. So thanks to everybody for participating. I want to just take a few minutes to leave a couple of messages with you. The cafe is on personal mobility, and there are many choices that one can make. As a consumer, you can decide to have a gas-powered car and drive less. You can take mass transit. You can have a battery-powered vehicle. So there are many, many choices. You can have e-bikes and so on. Now, one thing that I found helpful is something called the Avoid, Shift, Improve, ASI framework. And we will have an article on our website on this. This is taken from the UNEP, United Nations Environmental Protection document on emissions gap. And it is based on scientific studies. So this, what this does is it provides a framework to guide choices, some of which I've listed. And it also shows the impact in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. And it's based on scientific studies. So in the paper, I will show the UNEP reference as well as the scientific paper that went behind it. So let's go to some of the choices. Avoid. You can avoid a particular mode of transport. For example, taking one less flight a year. Shift. You can shift from driving a gas-powered car to taking mass transit. Improve. You can improve the efficiency, i.e. reduce the carbon emissions without changing the underlying mode of transport. So you can shift from a gas-powered car to an electric vehicle. And according to the ASI framework, those 3 examples I gave, taking one less long-haul flight, shifting from gas-powered car to mass transit, and going from a gas-powered car to a battery-powered electric vehicle, that's improved. All those 3 actions will reduce the greenhouse gas on average about 1 to 2 tons per capita per year. So if you do that for 1 year, you would reduce your emissions by 1 to 2 tons. Now, to put this number in perspective, the average Canadian, we live in a wealthy country, in a big country, in a country with a harsh winter climate. The average per capita emissions per year is about 20 tons. So 1 to 2 tons is 5 to 10%. And this is on mobility alone. So the ASI framework also touches on food and housing. And those are other choices that one can make. But the session here is on mobility. So the bottom line here is that your choice and your action can make an impact. Now, the second point I want to make is we can also exercise our responsibility as citizens i.e., we can exercise our civic responsibility, right? And this could include talking to your friends and colleagues, people in your community, about the choices that you have made. And you could advocate through grassroots organizations. You could talk about ESG, environmental, social governance considerations with your banker and with your investment broker. And you can also engage politically with politicians, for example, to work for climate-friendly politicians. So again, two messages. The first is, as consumers, we have choices and actions that we can make. And the particular choice and action will depend on your personal context. The second message is, as citizens, we can also help shape the environment around us, help shape the social norms that govern this environment. So two messages that set the context, and the panel members have made diverse choices in mobility. So we'll hear from them now. So back to you, James.
All right, thanks. Let me quickly introduce the four panelists. So our first panelist is Lucien. He's owns a Tesla. He lives in Gatineau. Next panelist is Natasha, who is the mother of two young kids, lives in Victoria, BC, and who used to bike all over Edmonton, back when Edmonton was not a very bikeable city. And third, we have Tyler. He's the father of two young kids, lives in Toronto, and does not own a car. Lastly, we have Veronica, also lives in Toronto and does not own a car. So let's get into the questions. So this is going to last about 20 minutes. So Christian, I'll start with you. So what was behind your decision to, in your case, to buy an electric vehicle, more specifically, to buy a Tesla?
So in my case, I would say that I've always been cognizant of the problem we're facing with climate change, and I've for a long time I've been trying to find solutions, at least in my own behavior and my own choices, to try and reduce my own impact. And so when I saw the first Teslas being teased in 2006 or so, the roadsters that they initially had made, I just knew that I wanted to have that one day. And through time, I've heard lots of conflicting reports about the environmental impact of an electric vehicle as opposed to a gas vehicle, and I sort of eventually shifted to study in the field in environmental economics, and I sort of figured out all the literature that's available out there that shows life cycle emissions, and showing that even though it might be more polluting in terms of GHGs to build an electric car, on the overall life cycle of the vehicle, it ends up being a net reduction of emissions. And when the Model 3 became available, it was a cheaper electric vehicle that was really a no compromise kind of choice for an electric vehicle, given that it charges so fast and had such long range. So it was just.
Great, thanks. Next, I'll move on to Natasha. So as I said, you live in Victoria right now, but you used to bike around Edmonton. And so what was behind your decision to do that? Especially since Edmonton wasn't very bikeable back then.
Well, I think for me, I was a student for a very long time. So I think the biggest thing was cost. So when I first moved to Edmonton, I grew up on Vancouver Island, so I can't drive in the snow anyway. So it's safer for me to be off the roads. But yeah, I think the thing for me was cost. You didn't have to pay for parking at the university. You didn't have to pay for a car. And I also lived really close to one of the big transit hubs in Edmonton as well. So any place that was too far to bike, I would take transit. Otherwise, most of the places around the university was where I went to, like the rowing club. And so I would bike there quite often. Of course, now we're in Victoria, so not biking as much, but yeah, the big thing for us was cost.
Thanks. Hey, next I'll come to Tyler. So you have 2 young kids, you live in Toronto and you don't own a car, which is not the most obvious decision for many people. So what was behind that decision?
Well, the decision was made a number of years ago. I grew up in Minneapolis and also lived in Atlanta before moving to Toronto. And I'm actually in Minneapolis right now, which has prompted a lot of reflection about getting around with a car, which I do have right now, having rented one. But having lived in Atlanta, the city has a lot of sprawl. Everything is spread out. And when my wife and I decided to move to Toronto, we knew we didn't want a car. We didn't like, we wanted to, it was an environmental decision for us to find a way to not need a car all the time. We still rent cars. This will maybe talk about this later. You know, my son plays baseball, and I'm probably renting a car about 4 or 5 times this summer to go to tournaments around Ontario. So still use a car, but we don't own one. You know, we live right downtown and can use subway and bike lanes and walk. So that's, but it was environmental. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And now I'll come to Veronica. So similar question, you live in Toronto, you don't own a car, and so what was behind that decision?
So for me, it was kind of natural. I live in Midtown, and I live in close to everything I need, really. So my friends also, they have a car, so I can get around with them. And there's also an option to rent a car if needed. So I decided that unless I really need the car, I'm not gonna get one. So
yes, that's great. So next question. So I'll come back to Christian for this one. So what advice do you have for anyone who is considering buying, in your case, a Tesla, or more broadly, an electric vehicle? What's your advice to those people, Christian?
So I would say that first, the most important thing is really to understand what your needs are. So I think for electric vehicles, it's very important to figure out whether this vehicle will be your primary vehicle or a secondary vehicle. If it's a secondary vehicle, it's very easy to get by with very short range, which means that you can purchase a vehicle that's much less expensive and can save you a lot of money if you're using it as a secondary vehicle. If it's a primary vehicle, then some more important considerations come into play. So you have to think about the idea of having long range potentially in the vehicle and having higher charging speeds, which can be important. But if you don't travel a lot between cities, with the amount of money you can save by, say, going for a Nissan Leaf that has slightly shorter range, you could always rent a car for travel between cities. So there's many considerations, but I would say one that's not made very obvious by car manufacturers or in advertisements is charging speeds, which is very important when you're doing long distance travel. So range is one that's focused on quite a bit, but if the batteries can't take a charge over a certain speed, it probably will impact your ability to travel long distances quite a bit. And I would just add, in terms of the costs, electric vehicles are more expensive upfront, but the savings that you can generate are quite significant. And if you're financing your car, like, yes, your car payments might be more expensive, but at the same time, the money you would be spending on gas, you end up using to pay your car instead with all the savings you're generating. So it's not if you'll have a huge chunk of money that's just gone. It's coming out of pocket.
Hey, thanks. Hey, and Natasha, what about you? What's your advice for anyone who is considering a similar lifestyle to yours?
I think for us, I mean, we put a lot of thought into where we were going to live to make sure we were close to all the big amenities that we would need. So big transit centers or that have a lot of different route options. Where when we lived in Edmonton, we were about 5-minute walk from grocery stores and a rec center. And when we ended up having our kids, we were a 15-minute walk to the daycare. So I would walk them in the morning and drop them off. Since we have moved to Victoria, we've chosen to live very close to my workplace. So it is about a 20-minute bike ride or a 10-minute drive. I will say we do have one gas car, a smaller car, but I'm also working remotely right now. So we actually aren't using it too much just to get to daycare when we had it. So yeah, I think the biggest advice would be to look where you travel the most often and try to plan, if you're moving, try to plan around that to make sure you can easily access all the things you need.
Thanks. Now on to Tyler. So what's your advice for anyone who is trying to go car-free in a city like Toronto, especially with kids?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Natasha said, location was very important. That played a huge role in where we in going car-free. My wife, we both work at the University of Toronto, so we've always lived within walking distance there. You know, advice is, you know, one of the huge benefits of this is that you know your commute time every day, right? And you know, and you have a lot of control. So you know, and with kids, we knew how long the daycare was. Time was very important when they're little, and you know, we invested in a really great stroller. And I think at one point we had about 4 strollers for different reasons, different uses. We also have, you know, we're not afraid to buy a lot of pairs of shoes. Very high quality shoes, I will say. You know, our kids, they probably, you know, my sons, they have a Fitbit. They're averaging like 25,000 to 30,000 steps a day. They walk to school back and forth every day, and you know, they're just used to it now. They don't know anything else. They don't, you know, so you kind of make this lifestyle adjustment, and that's what your life is. I don't know, that it's a privilege to do this, really, too. This is not something that's easy for everyone with everyone's job, so I totally acknowledge that. But if you can do it, there's a lot of freedom with your time, I would say, and same with your kids.
Thanks. And Veronica, similar question, your advice for going car-free in Toronto?
I think that maybe it's a good start to try it for some specific period of time, like for a month or 2 months, and see what way would work for you the best, either taking transit or walking or biking, and then take it from there.
Okay, great. Okay, third and last question, and this is the one that I'm actually the most interested in hearing. So I'll start with Christian again. Have you learned anything about yourself or the world through this lifestyle choice that you would not otherwise have known?
So I would say that the biggest thing I've learned is in terms of travel habits. So I've always been sort of part of this mentality that when I'm doing long travel, it's sort of a chore, and I just want to get it over with as soon as possible. So if I'm 5 hours away from Quebec City, in 5 hours, I want to be there and for it to be done. But now with an electric car, I might be able to make it to Quebec City, but it's always easier to just charge on the way. And cutting the travel time is actually a lot more relaxing and a lot more satisfying overall in terms of taking that trip. So I realized that like those sort of usual habits that people have of never stopping on the road is just not for me.
Thanks. Natasha, same question. What have you learned about yourself or the world?
I guess mine is more what have I learned about the world. So especially when we were having our kids, so we have twins. So it's a bit of work, but a lot of people are skeptical when we didn't want to get an additional car or live in a bigger place, etc. And so we had a lot of discussions, and a lot of people, I think, were kind of almost trying to scare us into getting another car. What if this happens, and have all these kind of fear scenarios, especially for, you know, a first-time parent, because I think they just aren't used to seeing people with, you know, multiple kids either live with one car or even without a car, right? So it was a little bit tough, because we're like, okay, well, you know, if we need to get another car, we'll need it. But I mean, the thing is, none of these scenarios that they were listing ever happened, and we've never found a need to get another car. So I'm hoping we can be somewhat of an example. I mean, we can fit our twin stroller with our 2 car seats, with our training potties, with our little bikes into the one car, and it's perfectly fine. We don't need an SUV, we don't need a van. But yeah, I think a lot of people were very skeptical about what we were doing, just because they probably haven't seen any examples yet. So yeah, that's kind of what I learned. So hopefully we proved them wrong. So
Good job, thanks. And Tyler and Veronica, same question. What have you learned? Start with you, Tyler.
Thank you, James. You know, I think we learned, like, you know, for example, like, you know, we went to hockey every week. We took the subway, we walked to the arena. We can do all these things. We can live in the city and do these things. The biggest thing I really learned, though, is that, like, I can change other things in my life if I make a major decision like this. You know, I can stop. You know, we had this car-free lifestyle. Now we're like, okay, what if we cut out, you know, we only eat meat once a week or twice a week, for example. Like, we can make these changes, and we're not really sacrificing anything. We can still live a really good life. We can still feel really good. We can still do all the things we want to, just by making a few subtle changes. So that was the big thing I really felt from the change.
Thanks. And you, Veronica?
I think that just simply enjoying the nature environment around myself when I'm walking outside, and yeah, I think to appreciating what we have actually, and be grateful for it. I think that that's a thing I learned, that I can connect with the world that's around me more.
Okay, great. So that brings us to the end of the formal questions. So we will now open up for questions from the audience. So as mentioned, you can raise your virtual hand through the reactions button, and I will put you on the spot to ask your question. Yes, Carlos.
Hi, hello everyone, and I'm very pleased to be here. It seems that I'm the only foreigner in this panel. I'm not sure if I'm the only one that is not in Canada right now. But my comment has to do exactly with that. I mean, by hearing what you say, it's kind of amazing, not amazing, but I think it's expected. But I live in a completely different sort of environment here. First of all, I live in a place where I don't have that mass transportation that you probably have in order to do what you're doing right now. I'm not even on a biking distance from anywhere that I would like to be, unless I'm going to that place over my computer screen or something like that. Secondly, we don't have the necessary infrastructure, recharging infrastructure to have electric cars around here yet. I do have a plug-in hybrid that I use basically as a gas car when I use it, because there is not enough infrastructure to recharge my battery, the battery of my car. I also think about changing my car. If I have to have a car, that's a need here, or else I don't go anywhere. If I decide to go walking by, I have a security problem because Rio de Janeiro is not the safest city in the world. So we live in a completely different kind of environment here, and I'm wondering here what I should do in order to adopt a lifestyle like you have, or like you are possible to have in Canada, in Toronto, whatever you are in Canada, which is for us is something that completely out of question. So the only way that I would say that I might have some sort of a net zero kind of behavior would be to buy carbon credits or something like that in some place. But I wouldn't be able to change my lifestyle, my transportation here in Rio, because I live in a completely different kind of reality here. I don't know if you have any idea what I could do in order to improve my point here.
Well, it's true that we are in some way limited by our environment and the city that we live in and the circumstances that surround us. I would say that the objective of this session is to encourage people to do whatever they can, however small. And that includes, talking about it, even if you're not able to make any lifestyle changes per se, but, talking about it as we are doing right now, I would argue is a lifestyle change. It's a contribution to something that we would otherwise sweep under the rug. Any comments from anyone else about that?
I have, oh.
Yeah, Natasha, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have one small comment. I mean, because like, I guess where we're living in Victoria, so we do have one small, it's a gas card, so it's not even a hybrid. So you're doing better than us in that. But where we are in a very rural area, so we have farm fields just down the road. I think most of the amenities are about a half-hour walk away. So it's walkable, but it's also a little bit inconvenient to walk half an hour to get some things. I think my only suggestion would be, if you do take your car, to, try and squeeze in as many possible, separate trips into that one trip. And maybe you already do that. I'm not sure, but yeah, since it is a bit tricky if you are limited if you don't have the mass transit, because we also don't have a very convenient bus for me to even take to my workplace. It would be, I don't know, a 20-minute walk, and then the bus comes every 2 or 3 hours for me to get to work. So I think, yeah, if you can squeeze in as many trips into that one car trip, I think that would be helpful, but I'm not sure if anyone else has any other insights or ideas.
If I could jump in here now, I think if we take one step back, I think the context is very important here, right? We make decisions in a context, and that's our own context, right? So political, cultural, economic, and environmental factors and other factors come into play. So in your case, Carlos, you may not have the flexibility that someone who lives in Toronto or Victoria has. And that's fine, right? There are other things that one can do to reduce the greenhouse impact. You mentioned one, carbon credits. There could be things totally different from mobility in housing, in food choices that one can also make. And so I think the context is very important, and the context is different for each one of us.
Christian, are you going to say something?
I just wanted to echo something that James said, that just getting involved in these discussions and talking to your peers and people in your community is something that might look very small, but can can have an impact in forming grassroots movement that push to get some of those solutions to become more realistic. Obviously, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, that charging infrastructure will become available to people. But if there's a demonstration that people want to have that ability, then maybe people start paying attention, and eventually it becomes possible one day.
Right, thanks. Any other comments about Carlos's question before we move on?
Sure, James.
Yeah.
I just want to
Mhm.
mention I found advocacy with your local politicians. Maybe it's you know, advocating for a bike lane or something else kind of in your neighborhood, or something that you're like, you know, for me this was I mean, I use that as an example because I tried to talk to our city councilors about adding some bike lanes in downtown Toronto, because I wanted my kids to be able to bike around and have that mobility option. And you know, the pandemic did mean Toronto did add some, which is great. And now we're adding biking to what we can do, and we're able to explore more of the city. I know you mentioned safety and other things, and that's very much a consideration. And you know, certainly that is a whole other issue as well to handle. And I'm not sure I have the answers for that in this session, but I would just add advocacy. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, moving on now. Let's see, Jan has a question. Go ahead.
Let me see first. I am a cyclist. I'm Janet. I'm a cyclist. And I'm so glad to see so many of the people who spoke today are young and have made lifestyle choices that will reduce their carbon footprint, because you are the future. You are the world right now, and you are the future. And you are the model for the future generations. Your children growing up will know the normal that you have set for them. And this will move the dial away from always be dependent on a gas car and so forth. So I'm very happy to see that. It gives me, as an older person, hope. Now, what discourages me is when I am on the road and I'm a cyclist, I go all over the city, span the entire width of Toronto. I don't go beyond Highway 401 to the north in Toronto here, because it's very dangerous crossing those on-ramps. I feel very, very vulnerable. But I'm very thankful to the city of Toronto and for all the politicians pushing for bike lanes. And like Tyler has said, a lot of people have advocated to have those bike lanes put in, so that I, as a cyclist, a very vulnerable road user, I feel safer now that I'm on the road. But I've been cycling here in Toronto for 10 years. And in the beginning, it was very difficult. So definitely advocacy is very important. And the other thing I see is I'm out there and I see young families, like the ones who spoke today on the panel. They are out with the children, and some with even toddlers. They are out in the cargo bike. So instead of an SUV, by moving to a cargo bike, and what kind of model they set for their children, that will be the new normal. The new normal for people to see, hey, young families can do that without relying on a car. I don't see many people my age. Definitely very few females, very few old people. Unlike in Vancouver, I cycle a lot in Vancouver too. And there I see people that look like me on the bike, even much older than me, on the bike, on active mobility. So that is very validating and encouraging for me to see. But here in Toronto, we still have a lot of work to do, but advocacy is very important. And I find, as an older person, I get out there on the street and I make myself visible so that others can see, hey, the bike paths are being used. It's not a misperception, a myth that the bike paths are all inconveniencing motorists for nothing, for no one. I would also champion that bikes and cyclists, we take up far fewer space, much more space will be needed if we were 10 cyclists and 10 cars. There's no comparison. So the perception could be, there's no cyclists going down the bike path, and now we're all inconvenienced because the two sides of the streets are being taken up by bike paths. Well, the cyclists will use it if you build it for them. And because we are small in comparison to a car, it doesn't mean we're not there. It's just that we are not as significant. So I myself make it a point that I go push for this. I make myself visible. I go all over town to let people see that the bike paths are being used. So I feel glad that I, in my own small way, I advocate with my own action by just getting out there and letting people see the bike paths are being used. And we need more of those to get more people to give up the car, or at least use the cars less. A carbon-free, low carbon lifestyle mobility may be possible, but people may not have considered it. A car-free lifestyle may not be for everyone, but the low carbon mobility may become more and more of a choice for the people in every city if the infrastructure is there. Thank you.
Thanks. So there's a question in the chat, or a comment from the chat from Brent Kelly asking about what are the biggest policies, changes that governments, state, provincial, that they could implement to enable low carbon lifestyles? What could governments do to make it easier to have a low carbon lifestyle? So I think I'll reframe that slightly to more in line with the theme of this. So do the panelists have any thoughts on the role that government policy played in making this, in your decisions, your respective decisions? How about I'll start with Christian. Did government policy affect your decision to buy an electric vehicle?
So I would say that indeed it did. So it mostly affected timing in terms of my my purchase decision, where I knew I wanted to buy an electric vehicle eventually, but obviously the upfront cost is quite significant. So at the time when I purchased my vehicle, living in Quebec, I had access to the $8,000 subsidy from the government in order to purchase my vehicle. So that was, I would say, the most significant signal I got from government that that affected my decision.
What about the other panelists? Did government policy play a role in your respective decisions?
I would say mine is it's a bit more long term, in terms of building mass transit, ensuring that there's density, more like allowing a lot of people to live around transit so that they use it, that it's it's just well used, right? In terms of, I wouldn't have biked in Toronto if there weren't bike lanes, just to be blunt. So like I didn't feel safe. And so, that kind of infrastructure, absolutely vital. I wouldn't let my kids bike if those bike lanes weren't there. So those kind of government policies, I think, can make a difference very much. And I think with transit, mobility options like driving, all of and like housing, these go hand in hand, in my opinion. Making sure that people can live around places that have these options is important, just because more people can do it, right?
Thanks. Any other thoughts on this question before we move on about government policy?
Yeah, and James, I will contribute a point here. I think government policy is crucial, right, to make all this work. And I'll give a concrete example on the uptake of electric vehicles in Canada. Right now, the leading provinces for EVs, battery-powered EVs, are British Columbia and Quebec. A few years ago, Ontario was on that list. But when Doug Ford came in, he rolled back the provincial subsidies. And guess what happened to the uptake rate? It plummeted. Right. So right now, Quebec and BC have the lead. That's the first point. The second point is, if we look internationally, Norway is by far the world leader in EV penetration. And I don't know the latest figure, but it's something like 80% now in battery-powered EVs. And it went from a few percent to 80% in something like 10 to 15 years. How did that happen? Government policy, government infrastructure, government expense to put in charging infrastructure was instrumental, right? And of course, none of this is easy, right? None of this is easy, right? It does take politicians' will to implement some of this. But Norway has shown, for a small country, that it can be done.
Okay, great. So moving on, I see Shuyi has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm a new mom, and actually Jen brought a good point about biking with toddlers. I'm kind of really scared about having a toddler on the bike seat, but I am in search of a secondhand bike trailer. So if you know anyone selling, let me know. But my question is to the panelists is, we're here to talk about your low carbon mobility lifestyle. I was wondering if you had a chance, or if you haven't yet, and how would you talk to people around you to encourage them to, take up low carbon mobility? And in particular for Tyler and Natasha, like how would you advise I, talk to my kid and children about that as well, if they see their peers have cars and, a lot more mobile?
Natasha, you want to start?
I will try. So my kids are 2.5 right now. So they don't have many friends at the moment, but yeah, so they haven't really, they love cars and trucks right now. Like that's their big thing. But I think right now it's just, this is what other people have. We have our little car, and then other people have their cars. So I don't really have an answer for how to talk to your kids about that. I'm hoping, kind of as Tyler said, like they just grow up and this is what they know. But I haven't gotten to that point yet. And I think with talking to people about low carbon transport, so most of the people I've talked to about this were in Alberta, and not to, hate on Alberta, but it is tricky to talk to people about it. And even when I was doing my PhD, talking to other students about this, I think there's just this, this given that, okay, oh good, I got this big award, I'm gonna go buy myself a car, even though all of these students are completely aware of what's going on in the planet. There's still this mentality, and there's also this this idea that so there's this idea that some of the students, at least, and potentially some of the academics, they have this idea that they're doing their part by being researchers. So they don't need to lower their carbon footprint because that's what they're researching. And so I had some tense discussions with some people, and I wasn't able to change their mind, but it was quite difficult for me to hear that. So and these are academics and people who know what's going on. So I'm not really sure if I've tried, and I don't feel I was very successful either. So maybe some of the others have some good ideas, and it might also be a location aspect as well. I'm in Victoria now, BC. There's a lot of EVs, so maybe a location is what's needed. But maybe Tyler has something to add on that.
Just a couple of things, just that, my kids do ask, like, why don't we have a car like, my friend Finn? And it's very much like, well, we tell them, for us, like, we can live here, and we walk at, we really like walking with you, for example, because when we walk to school, this is when we have like the best conversations with them. And, or maybe if we're taking transit somewhere, you have a book and this is your opportunity to read a book. Or just, again, just like we do other things with our time and we're able to do these things. And we also talk about the environmental reasons and why we made this choice and talk that through with them. And in terms of other conversations with people, I'll say I'm not opposed to cars. Like there's a reason. Even our kids ask us, like, well, some, like, your grandparents have cars because they, their jobs at the hospital, sometimes they need to go there quickly and this is the best way for them, for example. Like there are reasons, and I'm not against car use, but it's about talking about all the options, making things available, the opportunities there for people to have an alternative. Much like working from home, right, has eliminated commuting and there's fewer people driving because they can work from home. There's that's perhaps a fringe benefit from the pandemic, but that's another topic. So that's my 2 cents there, Shuyi.
Thanks.
Can I have
Okay.
can I say a word?
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Ron.
So I think that sometimes it can be also useful just probably to invite friends or family to use public transport if we are meeting somewhere, and if it is possible, just to say, hey, let's take a bike, let's get a bike, or take a subway and meet at the place.
Yeah.
And talking with everybody around. Yeah, that's another thing.
Great. Any further thoughts on that question?
If I may add, I think very often we have a tendency and sort of a mentality that whatever's been done is what needs to be done in the future. So of course, when you talk to people, it won't be easy to convince everyone. It's impossible to convince everyone. But the best we can do is sort of provide information on the choices that are available to people, to perhaps allow for them to take a step back and look at the situation with the facts in mind, as opposed to just the preference and the peer pressure that comes the dominant mode that's being used.
Yeah. All right, thanks everyone. Okay, so Madeline has a question. Go ahead, Madeline.
Hi, thanks for having me. My question touches a bit on something that Tyler just mentioned at the end of his. And I guess the question I would put to the panelists is, how have you found, and I apologize if maybe you already asked this because I got here a bit late, but so feel free to reframe if you did. It's how has the pandemic impacted your ability to live this life, for better or for worse? And what have you noticed? And I would just say personally, I've noticed lots of things in my day-to-day, but in particular, I travel frequently from Montreal to New York, and I'm still waiting for them to bring back the train. And I keep emailing and I keep writing, and I either have to drive or I have to fly, or I could take the bus and wake up in the middle of the night in Albany and like get off the bus. And it's a really awful experience. So that one's kind of out. And so for me, the pandemic has opened up some opportunities, but it's also opened up some complications. I'm wondering how that unfolded for the panelists.
Nice. So no, we have not had this question yet. Our panelist how has the pandemic affected your ability to live your lifestyle? Go ahead, Natasha.
Well, I think for me, it has not impacted it that much. I was on maternity leave during the first half of the pandemic. So I was actually really lucky that my husband was working at home. So I wasn't stuck with 2 screaming toddlers or kids, babies at that point. But I think for us, I mean, I was working at home and I'm still working at home. So I'm not taking transit anymore. Or really going anywhere for that matter. So I guess it made it a bit easier because I wasn't traveling that much, and then I rarely go outside right now to venture out, but yeah, so it has an impact. It's made things a bit easier because I don't have to go out to work. I'm still working at home. So it's probably not as helpful. Maybe some of the other panelists might have some other insight.
Any experiences from the other panelists on the effect of the pandemic?
I think I'm in the same position as Natasha. I think with everything moving online, there is less need to be taking public transport, at least for me. And I'm just keep walking as I used to before, and probably even more. So I think that's my bit.
I think the pandemic for me really, in terms of mobility, really made me think a lot about how, you know, knowing that many people have a lot of situations, like seeing, kids on Zoom or like pets or something coming on screen, and you kind of have this other feeling of, you don't know everyone's situation. So it's more of like a bigger picture, like mentality, I guess, of really accepting, and thinking that people are really making the best decisions and they're trying, and people, I think, want to, move towards net zero or whatever. It's really about, giving options and really thinking bigger about, finding ways to support people and having many options, I guess.
Any other points related to this question?
I feel like being a new, my response might not be as pertinent as the others, given the way the question was framed. But I guess the only thing in my case would be that the numbers I crunched beforehand, the scenarios I had of the amount of gas I was going to use, I ended up saving less money the years of the pandemic through remote work. But that's about the only thing, given that switching to an EV equates to roughly the same sort of lifestyle to still have a vehicle, essentially.
All right. Did Jan still have a question, or is that the hand from before?
My
Okay.
comment is in reference to the point that Brent Kelly posed about government policies. Ontario used to have an incentive for purchase of a e-car. I'm hoping with maybe a more progressive government, that Ontario can bring in not only an incentive for electric cars, but electric bikes. I'm cycling up and down Yonge Street, and the lower part of town is a main thoroughfare. And because it's an older part of town, the streets are narrow. So drivers, motorists who have been used to having 2 lanes in each direction are now reduced to only 1 lane. I am a cyclist and I'm going uphill. It's a pedal bike, so it takes me a while to climb the hill. But yet I'm far quicker to reach a certain point than all the motorists because they're all backed up. And I'm thinking, since most electric vehicles have only 1 single occupant, the driver, we're giving an incentive for people to purchase an electric bike, which takes up far less space. And the other thing with electric bike is you don't need to build the superchargers to charge electric bikes. People can charge the batteries at home. So that if the government has the policy in place to incentivize people who may not want to give up their car, but maybe even consider if you reduce the congestion that you suffer every single time when you go out to do your job, to run your errands. If you don't absolutely need your car, maybe an electric bike. Some of these bikes can go 75 kilometers before a new charge. So perhaps that could be considered.
Great point. So we have about 3 minutes left. Any further questions? If not, I'll ask one final question. Maybe each of the panelists can give a 20-second answer. So we've already touched upon this theme a little bit, but what reactions have you gotten from the people around you about your lifestyle choice? Well, we'll start with Christian.
So I guess the most common I've heard was that once I made this decision, people thought I was a whole lot richer than I was the day before, which sort of goes into the gap of information that exists, because I decided to spend more money because I was going to save money over the life cycle of the vehicle, and I intend to own it for 20 years, which will make it far cheaper than a gas alternative. But that was that was the biggest one.
Okay, great. What about you, Natasha?
I think the biggest thing is people have this assumption I can't drive because I never do. At least in Edmonton, that was because I was always taking transit. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just the way we've been. So I'm not really sure if there's any reactions. It's just kind of the life going from poor student slowly up the ranks. But it's just the way it's always been. So I think people are used to it, I guess.
Yeah. And Tyler?
Mostly it's like, how do you get groceries? I'm like, well, there's a grocery store a 4-minute walk away, and we go twice, maybe 3 times. And there's other, so we just do a lot of smaller trips. So, it really is like a lifestyle thing. Or, we pay more in rent, but, we don't have we don't have car payments every month. Yeah. So, kind of those things, they just kind of balance out. It's just it's a different life. And, this is one way to do it.
Thanks. And lastly, but not least, what about you, Veronica?
So I think that me and my friends here, at least we are on the same page, and they have similar lifestyle as me. Some friends, they have even car and they still ride a bike. And my family, I'm trying to get them to bike more. They all have cars, but it's really hard. But they are considering to get hybrid or electric vehicles. So I think that it's a step forward.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. So Charles, were there any final comments before we let everyone go?
Thank you.
You're muted. Oh,
Yeah, I just want to express my thank you to everybody. This is our inaugural Net Zero Cafe, and we will be holding these cafes as time progresses. And I think the emphasis will be on what you as an individual, citizen, and consumer can do. Now, it's in a Canadian context, and I appreciate Carlos's point, but we do have to focus a bit. But I think some of the points that we discussed will carry over to other countries as well. So again, thanks to everybody. Thanks to James for being the host, and we'll see you next time.
thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
All right.
That's
Thanks
the end
all.
of the-
Take care.
Good night.
Good night. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.